Most people think they have a bad memory. But the truth is, your brain is not broken. You were just never taught the system that makes remembering almost effortless. Once I learned it, everything changed. Now, I want you to think about the last time you pulled an all-nighter. Maybe it was for an exam, maybe a deadline. Maybe you just fell into a 3-hour YouTube spiral at 1 a.m. and told yourself you'd be fine. You set 3 alarms, maybe 4, and the next morning you showed up. You functioned. You answered emails. You made conversation. You even cracked a joke or two. You thought, okay, I got away with it. But here's the part no one tells you. You didn't get away with it. Your brain was already somewhere else. Illusion versus reality. There's a particular kind of confidence that comes with being sleep-deprived. Psychologists have a name for it, subjective wakefulness, and it's one of the most dangerous tricks your brain will ever play on you. When you stay up all night, something curious happens around hour 14, 15, 16. The fatigue spikes, and then it seems to disappear. You feel oddly alert, sharp even, a little wired. You think, maybe I don't even need sleep that much. But that feeling, that's not clarity. That's your brain running on fumes and misfiring your self-assessment mechanisms. The part of your prefrontal cortex responsible for evaluating how well you're actually performing, it's one of the first regions to go offline under sleep deprivation, which means the worse you get, the less equipped you are to notice how much worse you've gotten. Think about that for a moment. The measuring stick breaks before the thing being measured does. Benjamin Bloom spent decades studying how people learn, how knowledge moves from surface recall into deep, flexible understanding. He called this the difference between simply knowing something and truly applying, analyzing, synthesizing it. What sleep deprivation does is collapse that entire architecture. It leaves you with only the most primitive layer, rote recognition. You can repeat things back. You can perform competence. But genuine insight, flexible thinking, the ability to transfer what you know to a new problem? Gone. And the unsettling part is you won't feel the loss. You'll feel like you're doing fine. That's the illusion, the performance of functioning while the machinery quietly fails. Psychological tension. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. I've done this 100 times. I always bounce back. And that belief, that resilience, that pride is exactly where I want to sit for a minute. Because there's something deeply human about the refusal to admit that we need rest. Sleep in our culture has been framed as a weakness, a productivity gap, something to be optimized away. We glorify the grind. We wear exhaustion like a badge. And somewhere in the background, the quiet voice of our ego whispers, I'm different. I can handle it. But here's what the research actually shows, and this isn't a small finding. This is decades of converging neuroscience. Sleep deprivation doesn't just impair performance, it impairs your ability to know your performance is impaired. It's a double blindfold. Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences reminds us that human cognition isn't a single thing. It's plural, layered, contextual. You might be musically gifted, spatially brilliant, interpersonally perceptive, but those intelligences don't operate independently of the biological substrate that hosts them. Pull the substrate apart, deny it sleep, and every form of intelligence suffers, not evenly and not visibly, but measurably. The emotional intelligence goes first. You become more reactive, less empathetic, more prone to misreading other people's faces. Studies show sleep-deprived people perceive neutral expressions as threatening. You start seeing enemies in empty rooms. Then goes the linguistic sequencing. Words feel slightly out of reach. Sentences become approximate. You know what you mean, but the translation from thought to language gets glitchy. Then the logical sequencing starts to skip. You make assumptions you don't check. You take cognitive shortcuts you don't realize you're taking. And underneath all of this runs an emotional current that nobody talks about enough, especially for high achievers: shame. Because somewhere you know you're not at your best, and rather than acknowledge it, the ego turns it into irritability, into stubbornness, into "I don't need help, I've got this." The discomfort of vulnerability gets converted into the armor of false confidence. Confusion in this case isn't evidence that you're broken, it's evidence that something true is trying to surface. Core concept teaching. Let me explain what's actually happening inside your brain during sleep deprivation, and I want to explain it the way Richard Feynman might, not with jargon, but with image. Imagine your brain at night is a library that does its own filing. All day long, experiences, information, and emotions come flooding in. They land on whatever surface is nearest, a temporary holding area called the hippocampus. It's like the front desk of the library, receiving everything, logging it, storing it loosely. Now here's the thing about that front desk. It has a limited capacity, and it needs the night, specifically the deep architecture of sleep, to process, sort, and shelve everything into the long-term stacks. This process is called memory consolidation, and it happens almost entirely during sleep, particularly in slow wave and REM stages. When you skip sleep, the filing doesn't happen. Tomorrow comes, more information arrives, but the desk is still full from yesterday. New things pile on top of old, unprocessed things. Some get dropped entirely, some get filed in the wrong place, which is why sleep-deprived people misremember things not just less accurately, but sometimes with false confidence. You remember something you didn't actually experience. The filing system misfiled it, and now your brain swears it's real. There's more. During sleep, the brain also runs what researchers at the University of Rochester called its glymphatic system, essentially a biological cleaning crew. Cerebrospinal fluid flushes through the brain, washing out metabolic waste, including a protein called beta amyloid, which is associated with cognitive decline. When you sleep, the brain literally shrinks slightly to let this fluid flow through more efficiently. When you don't sleep, the cleaning crew doesn't come. The waste accumulates. One night won't destroy you, but the analogy holds. Imagine never taking out your trash, not for one night, but for weeks, for years of chronic undersleeping, which the majority of adults in the modern world are quietly doing. The accumulation is real. The consequences are slow, invisible, and eventually undeniable. So when you feel foggy the morning after an all-nighter, that is not metaphor. That is literally your brain operating in its own uncleaned, unprocessed, unfiled residue. But I want to go deeper than biology, because this isn't really about sleep. It's about who you believe you are. There's a particular identity that many high-performing people quietly carry. I am someone who pushes through. And that identity, for a while, works. It produces results. It earns approval. It feels heroic. But here's the quiet question I want you to sit with. What if pushing through, chronically, reflexively, as a default, is not a sign of strength, but of a misunderstanding about how intelligence actually works? Bloom's mastery learning framework wasn't just about assessment. At its core, it was a radical act of faith that almost anyone can learn almost anything given the right conditions and enough time. He believed that the gap between high and low performers wasn't fixed talent. It was time, support, and iterative feedback. Sleep is not separate from that framework. Sleep is that framework, biologized. It is the brain's own version of spaced repetition. It is the night shift of mastery. Every great musician who ever practiced a difficult passage and woke up the next morning playing it cleaner, that wasn't magic, that was consolidation. The brain worked while the musician slept. Gardner would say something complimentary, that respecting your cognitive architecture is a form of intelligence in itself. Knowing when to rest is not the absence of ambition, it's the presence of wisdom. And wisdom, interestingly, is precisely what sleep deprivation attacks first. So the question of identity becomes, can you let go of the story that grinding through exhaustion makes you stronger? Can you hold, instead, the possibility that resting is not retreat, but strategy? that the most intellectually humble thing you can do is honor the biological conditions under which real learning, real creativity, and real insight become possible. Curiosity requires an open mind. An open mind requires rest. It's not a metaphor, it's neuroscience. Here's the shift I want to offer you. Every time you've stared at a problem late at night and felt that blunt, dense feeling like your thoughts are moving through concrete, that wasn't your lack of intelligence. That was your brain asking, in the only language it has, for the conditions it needs to actually think. When you sleep on a problem, you are not procrastinating. You are giving your default mode network, the part of the brain associated with creativity, insight, and abstract connection making, the freedom to work without the noise of conscious effort. The aha moment in the shower, the solution that arrives over breakfast, the sudden clarity that seems to come from nowhere, those aren't random. They're the output of a brain that was given space. Thomas Edison famously slept very little, and he's often cited as proof that sleep is optional for greatness. What people don't mention is that Edison was also famous for his naps, deliberately, strategically taken multiple times throughout the day. He knew something intuitively that science now confirms. The brain needs cycles. It needs rhythms of effort and release. What changes when you truly absorb this isn't just your sleep habits, it's your relationship with uncertainty. When you're rested, ambiguity becomes interesting. Problems feel like puzzles rather than threats. Other people's ideas become resources instead of competition. You can hold two contradictory ideas simultaneously without needing to resolve them immediately, which, incidentally, is one of the core cognitive signatures of highly creative thinkers. Sleep-deprived, that same ambiguity becomes unbearable. The brain, running on threat detection mode, needs certainty, needs resolution, needs to be right now, even if it isn't. And in that state, that's when we make our worst decisions, our most rigid judgments, our most ego-driven mistakes. The world looks entirely different through a rested mind, not because the world changed, but because the lens did. So I want to leave you with something quieter than a solution, because this isn't really a video about sleep schedules or productivity hacks or the optimal number of hours you need tonight. Those things matter, but they're surface-level answers to a deeper question. The deeper question is, why have we built a world, and more importantly, an identity that treats the brain's most essential maintenance process as optional? What does it say about the stories we've inherited, about strength and worth, and what it means to be capable, that rest has become something we feel we need to justify, that we apologize for sleeping enough, that we treat exhaustion as a credential? Bloom believed that learning is not the performance of intelligence, it is the cultivation of it, slowly, iteratively, with honest feedback and appropriate conditions. Gardner believed that intelligence is not one thing, fixed and finite, but a constellation of capacities that can grow when honored and wither when ignored. And both of them, in their own way, were pointing at the same truth. The brain is not a machine that can be run continuously without cost. It is a living system, and living systems require cycles. They require darkness as much as light. They require silence as much as input. Tonight, when you lie down, if you let yourself, your brain will begin the work that no amount of conscious effort can replicate. It will file, clean, consolidate, and connect. It will solve problems you've been stuck on. It will heal emotional bruises you didn't know you were carrying. All you have to do is let it. So here's the question I want you to carry with you, not to answer immediately, just to hold, the way you might hold a stone in your hand and feel its weight. If resting was the most intelligent thing you could do right now, could you let yourself believe that?